Imagine being dropped into the middle of a prehistoric savanna. You have no natural body armor, no venom, you cannot outrun a lion, and you certainly cannot wrestle a bear. By all standard biological metrics, you should be a very quick, very easy snack. Yet, here we are today, sitting in climate-controlled rooms, splitting atoms, and sending rovers to Mars. How exactly did the ultimate underdog of the animal kingdom end up running the entire planet?
It really is the greatest plot twist in evolutionary history, isn't it? When you look at our ancestors millions of years ago, they were essentially defenseless. We tend to think of evolution as this brutal physical arms race who has the sharpest teeth, the thickest hide. But our ancestors opted out of that physical race entirely. Because they lacked those biological weapons, they had to lean into something invisible. They had to invent entirely new ways to survive, and that meant relying on a highly specific type of group dynamic that no other species had ever developed.
Which brings us to the core of what we are unpacking today. We see teamwork in nature all the time. Ants build massive, intricate colonies. Honeybees organize their hives with absolute precision. But human collaboration is fundamentally different. It is not just about surviving the winter. It is about rewriting the rules of the world. There is a concept that perfectly captures this phenomenon, something called the Universal Collective Impact Behaviors, or UCIB. It is essentially the secret code to our evolutionary success.
Exactly. And to understand how this code developed, we have to look back at the chimpanzee-human last common ancestor. Millions of years ago, these creatures were living in the safety of the trees. But eventually, some of them decided to venture down into the open, highly dangerous savanna. Without incredible speed or protective shells, surviving down there required a radical shift. You could not just react to threats anymore. You had to anticipate them. You had to assign roles, imagine new strategies, and cooperate on a level that required a rich system of symbols. You needed to communicate not just about the lion hiding in the grass right now, but about the lion that might be there tomorrow.
That shift from the here and now to the what if is fascinating. It reminds me of the cognitive trade-off hypothesis. The idea that we actually gave up a massive amount of short-term memory capacity in exchange for the ability to use language and imagine the future.
That is one of the most mind-blowing concepts in evolutionary biology. If you test a chimpanzee's short-term memory, they will absolutely destroy a human in a working memory test. They can memorize a complex sequence of numbers flashing on a screen in a fraction of a second. They need that hyper-detailed, immediate awareness to navigate the chaotic environment of the jungle canopy. But they do not need to plan for a retirement fund, or build a bridge, or plant crops for next season. They live entirely in the present. We, on the other hand, traded that photographic short-term memory for an operating system that allows us to process the past and simulate the future.
So, we essentially traded a high-speed local processor for a Wi-Fi connection to the collective human cloud. We lost the ability to remember where every single berry is in the forest, but we gained the ability to tell 100 other people how to plant an orchard.
That is a brilliant way to put it. And that Wi-Fi connection, that collective cloud, is driven by the three main pillars of those universal collective impact behaviors we mentioned. The entire system rests on three knowledge-oriented actions: seeking knowledge, sharing knowledge, and implementing knowledge through invention and innovation. These are not just cultural habits. They are deeply embedded evolutionary roots.
Let's break those down, because on the surface, seeking, sharing, and implementing knowledge sounds like a corporate mission statement. But biologically, this was the difference between life and death. Think about what it takes for a primitive human settlement to actually thrive. You have to obtain food, build shelters, raise children, and protect the perimeter all at the same time. No single individual can do that. It requires a staggering level of sophisticated planning.
And it requires the flattening of social hierarchies, too. You see complex social organizations in other species, like the ants we talked about. They have soldiers, workers, and queens. But an ant does not wake up and decide to innovate a new way to dig a tunnel. Their organization is biologically programmed. It is a closed loop. The human version, this seeking, sharing, and implementing, is entirely dynamic. It is not biologically fixed to one specific task. It is a fluid, ever-expanding process.
Which leads perfectly into the first major property of these behaviors, their unique universality. This is what truly separates us from the hive mind of a bee colony. Our collective behavior is not limited to a specific location, a specific tribe, or a specific task. I am reminded of a famous quote by Marie Curie, where she basically says that science is fundamentally international, and it is only through a lack of historical sense that we try to attach national labels to it.
That quote hits the nail on the head. The universality of our collective behavior means we can build on concepts introduced centuries ago by people we have never met, living in civilizations that no longer exist. An engineer today is using mathematics invented in ancient Mesopotamia to build a rocket going to space. No other species does this. A wolf pack in North America is not sharing hunting strategies with a wolf pack in Europe. But humans? We are constantly exporting and importing knowledge across time and space.
But here is where it gets really strange, and maybe a little philosophical. If this behavior evolved to keep us from getting eaten on the savannah, why are we still doing it so aggressively? We have conquered the food chain. We have built the shelters. We are safe. Yet, the second property of these behaviors is that they have become overwhelmingly curiosity-driven. We have scientists dedicating their entire lives to studying theoretical physics or the life cycle of a star billions of light years away. None of that helps us escape a predator today. Why did an evolutionary survival mechanism morph into an insatiable curiosity about the cosmos?
That is the million-dollar question. It seems that as we solved our basic survival needs, the mechanism did not just shut off. Instead, it decoupled from basic biological necessity and attached itself to pure discovery. We celebrate fundamental scientific breakthroughs even when we have absolutely no idea what they will be used for. Someone discovers a strange property of quantum mechanics, and for 50 years, it is just an interesting mathematical quirk. Then, half a century later, it becomes the foundation for all modern computing. We are biologically wired to hoard knowledge, trusting that eventually it will be useful.
It is almost like an evolutionary hoarding disorder, but for information. We just cannot stop collecting it. But that brings a darker, more complex side to the conversation. The third property of these behaviors is that they are ambition-generating. Ambition is uniquely human, but ambition is also a double-edged sword, which makes understanding and measuring this behavior not just an interesting academic exercise, but arguably the most urgent task we face. If this invisible superpower is what drives us, how do we actually quantify it? How do we measure human ambition and collective knowledge sharing? Because you cannot just put curiosity on a scale.
You cannot put it on a physical scale, no. But you can measure its biological footprint. And this is where the research gets incredibly futuristic. Every time we engage in these behaviors, when we learn something new, when we share a breakthrough, when we innovate, it is not just an abstract concept. It is a physical event happening in the brain. We are literally creating and strengthening neural pathways. Neurons are firing together to achieve a specific goal.
So there is a literal physical infrastructure being built inside our heads every time we engage in collective problem solving.
Exactly. But it is not just electricity. It is chemistry. Engaging in these universal collective impact behaviors triggers a massive hormonal response. When humans collaborate successfully, when we solve a puzzle together, our brains flood with highly positive neurotransmitters. We get a hit of dopamine from discovering new information, oxytocin from sharing it with our peers, and serotonin when that knowledge is implemented successfully. Evolution has essentially rigged our brain chemistry to make collective innovation highly addictive.
That makes so much sense. It is the biological reward system for keeping the species alive. We feel good when we invent things together, because nature is bribing us to keep surviving. But how do we turn that brain chemistry into usable data? I know there is a framework being proposed to actually track this, known as the Universal Collective Impact Behaviors Index, or the UCIBI. How exactly does an index measure a hormonal response?
Mm. The methodology behind the UCIB index is groundbreaking. The goal is to track and measure those exact neurotransmitters and hormones in real time under predefined conditions. You put individuals in a scenario where they are actively required to seek, share, and implement knowledge. You measure their neural and hormonal baseline, and then you track the spikes in their biological response during the collaboration. But it goes one step further. You then multiply that biological data by what is called the individual's unique factor, which accounts for their specific cognitive and experiential background.
Wait, so you are taking the literal brain chemistry of teamwork, quantifying the hormonal rush of discovery, and combining it with an individual's unique cognitive profile to create a measurable index of their collective impact potential?
Precisely. You get a tangible, numerical value, an index that represents how effectively a person or a group engages in our species' most important evolutionary behavior.
The implications of that are staggering. If we can measure this, we can optimize it. We could theoretically design educational systems, workplaces, and even entire societies to maximize this specific neurohormonal response. We could fast-track human innovation by literally hacking the biological mechanisms that got us out of the savannah in the first place.
And that is the frontier we are standing on right now. We spent millions of years unconsciously driven by these behaviors. They shaped our brains, built our cities, and sent us to the moon. But for the first time in human history, we are becoming aware of the underlying code. We are learning how to read the hormonal and neural metrics of our own ambition. If we can measure the Universal Collective Impact Behaviors Index accurately, we are no longer just passengers on the evolutionary ride. We take the steering wheel.
But taking the steering wheel always comes with a profound responsibility. Coded the biology of our collective success. The only question left is, now that we can measure and control the very engine of human evolution, what exactly are we going to build with it next?
And whether our wisdom can keep pace with our ambition.
A perfect thought to leave hanging in the air. Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the invisible forces that made us who we are. Until next time, keep seeking, keep sharing, and keep wondering about the future.